Hello everyone, Omycodd here. Welcome to my review of Cyberpunk 2077 on Xbox Series X. So I'm going to start this off by saying I know this game has been very controversial since its release, mostly due to the release on the Xbox One and PS4 and just the really poor handling of that situation by CD Projekt Red. It's a pretty unfortunate situation, and I want to put that aside and give this game honest review based on my experience on the Series X and how this game performs on the next gen hardware that it was really clearly actually designed for. So let's get that kind of disclaimer aside and let's kind of head into some of my first impressions, and then we'll break this up into some subcategories. So first off, overall first impressions, the initial feel of this game is really sort of like a hybrid of Grand Theft Auto mixed with like Elder Scrolls. That was kind of my experience based on like the open world structure as well as the quest based format and some of the mechanics involved. Overall, there's a pretty good story with this game. It's emotionally engaging for sure, and it gets you pretty invested as a player. I am not one to get super invested in games and characters, including their development and things, and this game definitely got me invested, which is saying something. There's a pretty intriguing skill tree system in this game that unfortunately is barely touched on throughout the main story, but offers a lot of promise for post-game and future expansions. There's a pretty detailed crafting system that also is not super accessible initially, but pretty intriguing concept. There's a ton of attention to detail in this game, specifically looking at Pan Am in that initial segment, but lots of great visuals throughout this game, and the world is pretty interesting to explore. Again, lots of potential for this world in Night City, but I think only scratching the surface really of the potential with this world and the amount we've been able to explore it throughout the initial release of this game. There's a ton of customization in this game, which I think is outstanding. The gameplay overall is fairly fluid, runs at a pretty smooth 60 frames per second at 4K without issues most times. I do have occasional drops to 40s for my frames per second, but overall is playing pretty smoothly at 60 frames per second. And then the last topic we'll talk about is just how buggy this game is. I think overall is still definitely playable on the Series X, and I would assume the PlayStation 5 as well, with pretty minimal hiccups, but definitely some things to discuss there. So with those sort of overall impressions out of the way, let's hop on into it, and starting off with the story. So I'm going to avoid any crazy spoilers. I'm really going to be pretty vague here. This story follows kind of a decision-based, multi-pathway story design. So I personally actually hated the ending that I got the first time playing through this. So I tried completing some of the other major quest lines. I believe there's 5 major quest lines for different characters and different endings associated with each of those. So I played through a couple times to get some of the different ones and had a much better ending because I felt very dissatisfied with the initial ending I got. So if you don't like the ending you get initially, I would recommend just playing through some of the other main quest lines and then picking those options. The character development in this story, like I said, is pretty good. The writers do a really good job of getting you emotionally invested in the story. You interact with a few main characters throughout different parts of the world, some more than others, again, depending on those decisions you make and which main quest lines you pursue. Certain characters do have the potential to become romantic with you based on your decisions. I'm looking at you again, Pan Am, and their role that they play in your story path. I don't have a whole lot else to say really regarding the story itself, honestly. I wish the endings weren't similar to like a Legend of Zelda game in that you go back immediately prior to the end game mission. So our decisions really don't have a lot of impact on the post game, and I wish that they did. Here's wishing for some kick-ass expansions in the future where we're actually able to have some post-game, end-game content. All in all, this story really got me personally invested in several characters, but mostly Pan Am, let's be honest. It's something that few games have ever managed to do, like I mentioned before. If I had to put a numerical rating on the story as its own, I would probably give the story an 8 out of 10 overall, docking a few points there for the non-impactful endgame decisions that we have, as well as certain parts of the story kind of feeling forced, rushed, or just not very fluid, and feeling like your decisions actually really don't matter in those aspects. Next up, we are moving on to the gameplay. So overall on my Series X, this game runs, like I said, at a smooth 60 frames per second, I would say about 90 to 95% of the time. I have occasional frame drops to the 40s at times, but typically I'm hitting 60 FPS at about 4K, although this game really doesn't look 4K at most times. I think part of that is the cartoonish, non-realistic world design that has an impact on that, but supposedly runs 4K. The gunfights in this game feel really good. The weapon variety, including katanas, they have freaking katanas in this game. That's awesome. I think the variety overall is pretty good. There are cyber optics and quick hacks that you can use throughout the gameplay to get an upper edge on your enemies, although these definitely aren't needed and I think can be overlooked for pretty much the whole game unless you specifically go out of your way to use them. That part was sort of a bummer to me, considering that these are one of the main aspects that I think the developers wanted us to focus on, and they are somewhat negligible unless you choose to go out of your way to use them. I do appreciate, however, that this mechanic is not forced onto players who are not interested in using it for the most part, which, whether intentional or not, does create for more freedom from the player perspective, and I don't think that's ever a bad thing. Vehicles in this game, kind of like I mentioned, but this game does have a GTA vibe to it, and the driving mechanics feel a bit clunky to me. Maybe it's because I haven't gotten any really incredible vehicles yet. However, I did unlock one of the Porsche vehicles recently, and it still just kind of handles like a dump truck. Turning at any speed over 40 to 50 miles per hour is kind of just frustrating, and it is really easy to accidentally hit pedestrians. This automatically puts a warrant out for your arrest. Fortunately, the police basically never pursue you or even come into play in this game unless you stand still right in front of them after killing someone in their face. And even then, sometimes they don't actually care. There are multiple gigs involving the police that actually involve them hiring you to basically clear out and brutally murder these sort of gatherings or gangs and securing some evidence. They don't actually consider this a crime, but you better watch out if you're going 5 miles per hour on your motorcycle and accidentally hit someone while trying to park it. That is not okay. The cyber optics in this game are pretty interesting. There are multiple access points that you can use to jack into, scattered throughout the world, and these are the main reason I actually even use the cyber optics, unless missions require me to for hacking or scoping out environments. Aside, I did not enjoy any of the brain dance crap in this game. I felt like it was forced. It was not a fun experience. Sort of a cool concept, but not fun from the player aspect of things. Anyway, these access points award you a hefty amount of materials and eddies, or Eurodollars, the currency in Cyberpunk 2077, if you successfully hack them. Not gonna lie, after about 30 to 40 hours in this game, I still do not totally understand how these work, but basically you just get the numbers in the boxes to match the numbers displayed on the right, and bada bing, bada boom, I don't know, that's basically it, but I get them most times, and you get a decent amount of chunk of change and some crafting materials. Fortunately, these also allow you to cancel out before you fail and try again, so you can kind of keep going until you're able to get the ones you want, as long as you don't successfully complete any of the 3 lines of code. Hacking cameras and stuff in this game does feel cool, however, again, it's not necessarily needed for clearing through the main story and side quests. I will say that I've been teasing around with some of the quick hacks recently in some of the more difficult side quests, and it has been somewhat more useful in distracting enemies, using things like contagion or overheat to spread poison or fire damage, etc. at these higher level missions. However, again, I don't feel these are necessary to clear the main quest line or even most of the side content. Overall, I think the gameplay in this game gets a 7 out of 10 for me. There are a lot of unnecessary mechanics introduced into the game very early on that I feel like you only get to really dip your feet into. And there's, again, a lot of overwhelming combat options available to you that you don't get to explore a lot in the main campaign, which I think is unfortunate. This may get better with future patches, expansions, spending more time in-game, but for now it feels like a very steep learning curve that I'm only now just starting to get under my belt after about 30 to 40 hours into this game. When you start to master some of these mechanics, such as quick hacks, however, it does make you feel like a total cyberpunk badass, and that feeling is something that few games have delivered on before. Lots of potential for this game in the coming years, as I mentioned previously, however, right now it just feels a little overwhelming for new players, and I think doesn't touch on some of these supposedly essential mechanics enough throughout the main quest line. Alright, next we are moving on to the customization of this game. Let's start with the weapons. There are tons of different weapon types in this game, as I mentioned before. There are also smart weapons that can be utilized after you get this cyber optic upgrade following an early quest reward that allows you to auto-lock onto targets with bullets and basically makes gunfights trivial to some extent. These weapons don't pack as big of a punch DPS-wise, but your accuracy can be pretty close to 100% if the enemy is in the weapon's generous field of view. These feel like kind of starter weapons for people who might not be as familiar with first-person shooters, and I don't have an issue with that. I personally don't use them a lot unless I'm like drunk and wasted at 3 a.m. trying to play the game and don't want to have to focus as much. Like most games nowadays, there are various tiers of loot in this game, ranging from white to orange, with orange or legendary gear being the rarest, and white or commons being the most common. I think I've gotten maybe 3 to 4 orange items at this point in the game, with most of the world drops tending to be white or green, The rarer the item, the more bonuses basically will be on it, including damage bonuses, elemental modifiers, headshot multipliers, things like that. And these higher level items or rare items also have more perk and attachment or mod slots for them, allowing you to further customize these weapons. Supposedly there's also a talking pistol in this game. I personally have yet to unlock it, but looking into some of the videos and tutorials on this, it looks absolutely hilarious, and GG to CD Projekt Red for putting something like that in there. Maybe something for me to consider unlocking as this video is rendering. In terms of clothing, not much to expand on here in addition to the weapon system described above. You get to unlock some of Keanu Reeves' character's clothes throughout the story, which is pretty cool in my opinion. You also get to unlock his main gun that you use early on in the quest, which is a pretty fun weapon. Similar to weapons, clothing has more armor benefit and mod slots available at the higher rarity levels, with mods allowing for things such as increased carrying capacity, stamina, evasiveness, etc. Your character will probably look like a total douche, as mine does throughout this video, if you are equipping your best random drops throughout your gameplay, just trying to keep up with the level of the content. A decent looking character will probably be a late post-game goal if you're trying to wear the best gear stat-wise throughout your playthrough. Although that's part of the fun with these games, but again, gives me sort of that GTA feel, where your character, especially in cutscenes, just looks totally ridiculous considering how serious some of the things are that they're doing. In regards to the skill trees, I think this is such an underrated and barely touched on component of this game. There are literally over 100, although I didn't actually count to be honest, but at least 100 different upgradable perks, if you will, on the various skill trees in the game that are unlocked as you progress your character's level and unlock perk points. After completing the main story and numerous side quests several times through, my character was sitting at around level 20 to 25 with a street credit of 30 to 35 and probably had unlocked about 20 to 25 perk points. This is really unfortunate considering how much some of these perks can add to the gameplay. There are multiple perks that are really appealing and desirable, including ones to craft legendary and epic perks that can't even be unlocked until your technical ability is at least 20. The skill trees are divided up into larger skill categories, including strength, cool, technical ability, intelligence, etc. These overarching categories can be upgraded once per level up, and they grant you access to alternate text interaction options, opening level-limited doors, computer access points, etc. in the open world. I wish that I would have grinded my character level and unlocked more of these perks prior to completing the main story, but hopefully there will be some good DLC expansions in the future that let me utilize the full customization that this game's skill trees offer. I don't believe that you'll be able to fully unlock every single perk in the game, as there is an epic item that lets you reset and redistribute your perk points. However, this may just be for people like me who aren't near max level and want to try out some different perks. Overall, skill trees are an awesome addition to this game, but are not touched on nearly enough in the early game and main story, and many players, I believe, will miss out on the bonuses that these perks offer if they breeze through the main storyline, similar to how I did on my initial playthrough. Overall, the customization in this game for me gets a 9 out of 10. There's so many options, but unfortunately they are not very well explained to the player and are not too accessible until later on in the game. I think this is something that can be reevaluated as future content and expansions are released, but I think it is not grazed upon enough in the early game and initial story to have a big enough impact on most players' experience of this game. Next up, we'll be talking about the world of Night City as a whole. I think the world of Night City is a pretty fascinating one. There are numerous districts throughout the city and surrounding areas, ranging from Pacifica, which is an oceanside, rundown, sort of Chicago Navy Pier vibe area, to areas such as the Badlands, which are a sandy, deserted wasteland with groups of rogue baddies, including our Bay Pan Am. These areas really range in terms of contrast of colors, uniqueness of the characters in these areas, and I think these are areas that we really could explore for days on end and not unlock all the secrets and interesting attention to detail that CD Projekt Red clearly played when developing this world. I do feel like parts of me are just experiencing another GTA world at times when playing this game, which definitely does take away from some of the newness as a whole. However, I do think there's a lot of potential here, and hopefully we'll be able to explore more of Night City in more depth, as well as new and unique ways in future content and expansions that are released of this game. Overall, I don't have a whole lot more to say about the world. I think explore it, appreciate it. It's a great open world game with lots of things to explore and lots of contrasting areas and characters throughout. Overall, the world design for me gets a 7 out of 10. I think there's lots of potentials, but some of it feels similar to other games, such as GTA, like I mentioned, and not as much exploring of the world through the main story occurs as I would have liked. Lots to be explored again with future expansions that will hopefully be coming. The last thing I really want to touch on with my review here is the bugs in this game. I think this is the elephant in the room, and I think it's something we do need to discuss with how significant this has been as a part of this game's launch. Yes, Cyberpunk 2077 does have a lot of bugs, and yes, these are really exponentially increased if you're playing on the old generation hardware, such as Xbox One and PlayStation 4. Because of that, I will recommend at the end of this review avoiding this game if you have those old generation hardwares and trying to wait until you are able to get your hands on a Series X, PS5, or are willing to compromise and play on systems such as Google Stadia. If you're not willing to make those compromises, again, I don't think this game is worth your time, but we'll talk about that more at the end. Even when playing on my Series X, I have experienced a handful of game crashes, which fortunately because of this game's frequent autosave features weren't too devastating, but still frustrating having to relaunch and go back a little bit in my progress. There were also instances where exiting a vehicle that I'm unable to run, jump, access my weapons, or really do anything for upwards of 30 seconds to a minute, and this can be really frustrating at times, especially when I'm in the middle of main game content and trying to complete quests. There are a fair amount of graphical glitches in this game at times. Few of these, however, are game-breaking from my experience. One, for example, is early on in the story when Jackie was eating with chopsticks. The chopsticks kept multiplying until he had about 20 pairs of chopsticks floating in front of his face. And while this sort of ruined the impact of the moment, it was actually kind of hilarious, and I personally didn't mind. I kind of enjoy little graphical glitches like this that don't actually affect gameplay too often. However, I know that these glitches have been very serious on Xbox One and PS4 and have actually had game-hindering experiences with the visuals as a result of this, and I agree that that is unacceptable in this day and age. Has CD Projekt Red done a good job of coming forward about all the bugs in this game and trying to address them in a quick and efficient way? Absolutely. Unfortunately, I don't think this will be enough to wash the sour taste out of many people's mouths after having already experienced the frustration of attempting to play a practically unplayable game. This fortunately has not been my personal experience, and I feel lucky enough to have been able to play this game on next-gen hardware that it was clearly actually designed for. So, that kind of brings this review to a wrap. I'm going to go over my overall impressions for this game, and then we'll leave it to you guys in the comments to let me know what you thought about this, and we can have some discussions going on over the weeks and months to come. Overall, as I've discussed throughout this review, the story is emotionally engaging with good character development, but lacks post-game impact with your decisions. Gameplay feels pretty good overall, but has a lot of optional components that I can't help but feel the devs wanted us to utilize more primarily than I personally did in my playthrough. The customization in this game is incredibly overwhelming, and I think that is a good thing. I want seemingly unlimited options for my weapons, clothing, and skill trees, and this game definitely delivers on those items, at least at first glance. The world is vast and open, but feels reminiscent of similar games and also feels underutilized in the main story. Its potential has yet to be fully elucidated, and hopefully future expansions will accomplish that feat. Lastly, the bugs. These are to be expected with a large open-world game like this, and I think the only aspect of Cyberpunk 2077's buggy launch that leaves a bad taste in my mouth is the way that last-gen players were left in the dust in a very blindsided way. That discussion's for another day, and I don't want to let that totally spoil my review of this game. The overall rating I chose for this game is a 7.5 out of 10. It's got a lot going for it, and lots yet to be taken advantage of in regarding its potential. For those of you looking for a good story, lots of gameplay customization, and a futuristic open-world feel, hop right in. This game is best experienced on PC, but Xbox Series X and PS5 do it a lot of justice as well. However, it is also available on Google Stadia, as I mentioned, and supposedly runs fairly well on there, assuming your internet is decent enough to support Stadia's streaming requirements. If you are still stuck with your Xbox One or PlayStation 4, as many consumers are at this time, given the limited stock availability of those next-generation consoles, I would recommend holding off on Cyberpunk 2077 for now. This game will hopefully be around for years to come, and future expansions could prove to elevate this game exponentially. I'm really hoping that bad press around this game related to its pretty messy launch do not derail any possibility of future content for this game. I've loved the majority of what Cyberpunk 2077 has offered thus far, and I can't wait to see how much of its potential this game can reach over the coming months and years. With that being said, what do you all think of my review? Do you agree with any of my points? Disagree with any of them? Any comments or questions on things that we discussed throughout this review? Any misleading or incorrect information that I can clarify on further? Leave a like if you guys enjoyed the video, and I look forward to the discussions we can have about Cyberpunk 2077 moving forward. Again, I think this is a great game, and I'm really bummed out that the messy release has kind of spoiled the taste for many. Hopefully you're able to experience this game on the next generation hardware it was designed for, and I'd love to hear about your guys' experiences as well, whether those be good like my own or bad like I know many others have experienced. That being said, I hope you all enjoyed the video. Have a good rest of your day, and enjoy your life in Night City.